Well, welcome to another episode of Howard's Orchids here in Cambridge. Today I thought I'd show you some of my miniature orchids. I cannot resist miniature orchids. They're a wonderful addition to any orchid collection. Now I know that many people grow miniature orchids in a terrarium in a very controlled environment, which is fantastic because you can grow a huge collection of orchids anywhere you like. I don't grow them in a terrarium and I don't have any experience of doing that. Instead, I have them dotted around the greenhouse, sort of hanging on other bigger orchids. And that enables me to indulge in my growing collection of orchids. So, for example, I have them sort of hanging on the edge of this shelf. And I've got several sort of thick bamboo rails sort of suspended just above head height, which enables me to hang them on there. And then over by the window, I've got this wire rack that I've got quite a lot on. And you can see along the top, for example, and this is the coolest part of the greenhouse, I've got a collection of Restrepias, which aren't looking their best at the moment because they were hugely overdue for a repot, which I did about 2 or 3 months ago, and they're just beginning to come on now. But Restrepias are marvellous because they're cool growing, and almost every time of the year there are at least some in flower. And then up near the light, this is a sort of half pot with a cattleya in, and I've got miniature orchids suspended around the rim of that pot. So the advantage for me is that I can just position the orchids where I think they'll do best. Now in a controlled environment like a terrarium, the humidity and lighting, everything can be very consistent over the year. Here, the disadvantage in having them dotted around is that the conditions vary hugely according to the time of year and what the weather is doing in the outside. So I constantly have to sort of move them around where I think each of them will do best. They might need to be over in the sort of coolest part of the greenhouse, and don't forget this is basically an intermediate greenhouse, so the conditions don't vary very much. It's very humid, typically 70 or 80% humidity, but the temperature throughout the greenhouse is more or less even, although the warmer things are over near the source of the heat and where I've got some heat mats, and the cooler things are right farthest away over on the window ledge, for example, where they're next to the glass and they keep as cool as possible. Now, the miniature that I wanted to particularly focus on today is this one. This is a very rare and very expensive and very beautiful orchid, Pleurothallis dressleri, which I've had since spring this year. And I wanted to show it now because it's actually got 2 flowers on. If you look it up on the internet, there's very little information about it. All it says, it comes from Panama at about 1,000 meters altitude. So that means it's warm growing. It says it grows on mossy branches, so that means it needs to be fairly moist and damp. And I'll just take you a bit closer because otherwise you're not going to be able to see anything because it's what you would call a micro miniature. Now you can see how tiny it is, and by getting closer you can see that the foliage itself is absolutely beautiful. And the flowers, although the plant is absolutely minuscule, the flowers are also very beautiful and huge in relation to the size of the plant. Now I've got this growing on a little tiny piece of cork, which is what it actually came on when I bought it. And it was a lot of money, it's very rare, and I was very nervous about having it in the first place because I thought, crikey, if I lose it, that's going to be absolutely tragic. But I'm pleased to say it's actually doing really quite well. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 growing points all the way around. The problem with these tiny miniatures is that the moss can sometimes take over. So what I've actually done every now and again is just sort of use these, well actually stamp tweezers, so they have sort of blunt ends so you can't accidentally spear anything, just to sort of move away the moss. You can see a sort of cleared area, a bit like weeding in the garden, just to give it clearance. And I'm hoping that it will do well consistently for me. So far, it's looking pretty good. It's got 2 flowers at the moment. The amazing thing is that being one of the Pleurothallis, the flower spikes do reflower. So this is the second flower on this flower spike. This is the first flower that came on this flower spike. And since I've had it, I suppose it's been in flower on and off most of the time. So this isn't a sort of kind of once only opportunity to show it. And I'm hoping that next year I'll be able to take 1 or 2 bits off and re-establish them on some more bits of cork. And that's one thing that I've discovered about some of the miniatures, is that you do kind of have to keep moving them on to sort of pastures new, as it were. In the wild, don't forget, they're probably growing on a tree or branch, and they can extend out, grow onto new bark freely. And if I bring it even closer, you can see that the foliage is marked in the most beautiful way. Oh, I've just noticed there's another flower spike coming there, top right. So I think it's actually a very sort of free-flowering orchid. At the moment it looks quite wet, and that's because in the morning I come in and spray all the mounted plants with rainwater. So you can see that it's quite wet at the moment, but almost dry out by evening. If there's a dead bit of foliage, just go in and pick it out before it introduces any rot. And that keeps it looking really nice and neat and tidy. But these, the dead leaves are those right at the centre in the oldest part of the plant, so it doesn't really bother me. And you can see that the new growth around the outside is perfectly healthy and growing really nicely. Another of my treasures at the moment is this Haraella retrocalla. Now in the past I've had this plant and didn't do very well with it. I can't quite remember, it's quite a long time ago, I can't remember what I did wrong. Anyway, I killed it, which is not something I really like doing with orchids, and luckily I don't do it very often. But you live and learn. So I decided to have another go. Now you notice that the roots are relatively, for the size of the plant, they're quite thick, so that kind of indicates that they are the sort of roots that want to sort of dry out between waterings quite well. So I made this I cut this long piece of cork oak bark and mounted it on that, and it seems as if it quite likes it. You can see that the roots have now, this is about 12 months on since I've had it, they've grown over the bark quite well. Interestingly, they've all grown upwards, so it's possible that I should have put it further down the mount to start with, but never mind. My current philosophy with quite a lot of the orchids is to put them on a long mount and put the plant somewhere in the middle, and then it can kind of decide where the roots want to grow, sort of give it its own choice. But this is a really exquisite little orchid, quite freely available and not too expensive on the internet. And not at the moment, but often if it's a bit warmer during the day, the flowers, although tiny, have a really quite a strong, really noticeable lemon scent. Now this is Ceratochilus biglandulosus, which has a ridiculous sounding name. It also has ridiculously large flowers for the size of the plant, and they last a ridiculously long time, at least 2 months. Unbelievable. Now I've had this plant for a very long time, 2014, so I've had it for 8 years. The mount that it came on originally was composed of sphagnum moss within a sort of net, sort of basket. And that sort of decomposed. I had it on there for several years, and the plant ended up more or less sort of hanging off. A friend of mine who grows this quite successfully had one on a fairly bare cork mount, and I noticed that the roots were adhering to that really quite well. So I took it off the original mount, strapped it to this brand new bit of clean cork with this elastic, comes from a sort of dressmaking shop, elastic, sort of very thin elastic. And after a while I was very pleased to see new roots growing and adhering to the bark, and it's done quite well. You will see pictures of it on the internet where it has branched. Unfortunately, this hasn't done so yet. However, it grows slowly but consistently and healthily, and the root growth is good. You probably can't see it there, but there's a new root coming there. And as the roots come out, as this one did, they grow towards the mount and start adhering to it, which is very reassuring. So this gets sprayed every morning on the mount, not so much on the foliage, and then dunked once a week in weak fertiliser. You see it's got a little blue pin marker, and that's to indicate that it's actually fairly cool growing, although in here it's intermediate. But it sort of reminds me that I don't need to, unlike the Pleurothallis dressleri, it means that I don't need to worry about it getting a bit too chilly. So the Pleurothallis dressleri is over near where there's a sort of heat pad, and that just lifts the temperature at night up a little bit, whereas this is further over away from the heat. And one more while I'm on. I can't resist showing you this. This is Angraecum distichum, which I bought this spring, largely for the foliage, which is absolutely beautiful. I mounted it on this bit of gorse branch, which is a substrate that is an alternative to cork. It's a native plant that grows in this country, and quite a lot of people have recommended it to me as being very good for growing mounted orchids on, and I must say I'm having a lot of success with it so far. Not only is the foliage of this beautiful, but so are the flowers, and they seem to come in flushes every now and again. And whereas you would expect most Angraecums to be scented at night, I came in the evening and tried smelling it and didn't notice anything. Oh, that's disappointing. But actually it's scented during the day. So around sort of midday, early afternoon, it has this really quite strong, very sweet, beautiful scent from these tiny little flowers. Anyway, I've probably said too much for this episode. I'll have to try and edit it down as much as possible. I could talk for hours about orchids, and especially miniature orchids. So thank you for watching, and thank you ever so much to all my subscribers. I've just passed the 500 subscribers mark, which is, for me, wonderful. I never expected that. So goodbye from me, and see you in the next one.